Hello and good morning, geometry, and happy Friday. So today is day 3 of distance learning. It is Friday, October 3rd, and we are going to continue reviewing some of the old units that we have looked at. So today our focus is working with parallel lines, specifically ones that are cut by a transversal. So we spent a lot of time talking about all the relationship between the angles. Remember, it creates 8 angles in total. So we're going to start by reviewing some definitions that I know we wrote down in our notes. But again, good to review. So the first symbol that we've used most often in geometry so far this year is this congruent symbol. And so remember, that just means that those two values are exactly the same. So again, if you were going to pick up a triangle that was the exact same size as another triangle, in other words, they were congruent, it would fit exactly on top of that. So the exact same size. So that's our congruent symbol. Supplementary, that means that two angles add up to 180 degrees. The other one we're thinking about is complementary. Those are when two angles add up to 90. We don't need those today. But supplementary, again, is when two angles add up to 180 degrees, or they make a linear pair, right? So they're going to make a straight line when you add those two angles together. And then the last definition is parallel lines. So we talked about parallel lines for quite some time in Algebra 1, and they reappeared in geometry. So again, parallel lines are two lines that will never meet. They'll never intersect. And the reason that happens is because they have the exact same slope, but a different y-intercept. So a different starting point, but they are rising and running at the same rate, or they might be dipping, right? So it could be two positive lines, or they could be two negative lines. Or in this case, two lines with the slope of 0. So we'll put our little cheat sheet to the side here. All right, so we are going to do a little refresh on the angle relationships for parallel lines cut by a transversal. So we have line A and line B, and we know they're parallel because they have this little symbol, those two little arrows showing that both of these lines are in fact parallel. And then we have line L running right through here. So what happens is when this transversal runs through two parallel lines, it creates 8 distinct angles. And so we're going to start by talking about this angle right here. And we talked a long time about angle relationships in geometry, and vertical angles are nice because they are created using the same lines. And so vertical angles are also congruent. So I know that this angle and this angle are going to be congruent when I'm looking at these parallel lines. We also know that parallel lines have a lot of similarities, like their slope. So if I were to pick up this line and drop it right on B, that I know that this angle right here would land where I just drew this other pink dash. And that means that this angle, we'll call this angle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That means that angle 1 and angle 5 are called corresponding angles. They are congruent. But then again, if I look here, if I were to pick up the same line and drop it here, 3 would land right on 7. And 5 is a vertical angle with 7, meaning that this angle would also be congruent to the other 3 angles. So those are our first relationships that we talked about. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, which is also congruent to angle 5 and angle 7. Now, if I'm looking at just the top line here, I know that angle 1 and angle 2 have a special relationship. If I were to add angle 1 plus angle 2, I get a line, which means that angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. So I know that if I were to add angle 1 and angle 2, they'd be a different value. And so angle 2 is also a vertical angle with angle 4. Those are also congruent. And if I were to pick up that picture and drop it off, angle 6 and angle 8 would also be congruent with those angles. So we have a couple of different relationships happening here. We have angles that are existing in the exact same spot. Those are always congruent. We have angles that are vertical angles, also always congruent. And then if we look here, we have angles that are on opposite sides of the transversal, so alternate, and on the outside. So they're called alternate exterior angles. So angle 8 and angle 2 are also congruent. So alternate exterior angles are congruent. Same thing with angle 1 and angle 7, alternate exterior angles. If I look at same side exterior angles, also known as consecutive exterior angles. Angle 2 and angle 7 have a different relationship. They're not congruent. They are supplementary. Because if angle 2 is supplementary with angle 1, then angle 2 also has to be supplementary with angle 7. So same side exterior angles are also supplementary. I know that same side interior angles have the same relationship, they add up to 180, but alternate interior angles are congruent. So we're going to use that knowledge to help us solve some problems. So I have a little cheat sheet here, I'm going to keep it. I now know my relationship between each of these angles. I will post it up here, we'll refer to it, and we're going to use algebra to find some values. All right, so fix this line a little bit. If I were given a problem where I knew that this angle over here was 160 degrees, right here, if that angle is 160 degrees, and I'm telling you that this angle down here is equal to 5x minus 10, and I'm asking you to find what the value of x is, the very first thing you have to do is find the relationship. So I'll look at my parallel lines. I'm going to decide if they're on the same side of the transversal or on opposite sides. If I look here, they're on opposite sides, so they're alternate. And then I need to look at whether they're inside the parallel lines or on the outside. They're on the outside, so they're alternate exterior angles. So they exist where these two green lines are, right? So this angle and this angle. Because they're both using the green color and they're both using the two little angles, that means that they are congruent to each other. So I could write the equation using my two values. 5x minus 10 is going to be equal to 160 degrees. And then I could solve that equation. Inverse operations, I would add 10 to both sides, end up with 170 is equal to 5x. And when I divide both sides by 5, the 5's cancel out, and then 170 divided by 5 is going to be x is equal to 34. Now just a quick reminder, that does not mean that this angle is 34 degrees. That means that this whole value is 160 degrees because I need to substitute in that 34 for x. Now we know they're congruent, so we knew this is 160 degrees. Let's check real quick. If I substituted in 34, 5 times 34 is 170, and 170 minus 10 is in fact 160. So this angle is equal to 160 degrees. So your quizzes today is going to have a bunch of different angle relationships, but remember the first thing you need to do is decide whether or not they are supplementary, the relationship is supplementary, or if they are congruent to each other. So if you'd like to pause the video here and take a look at which angles are congruent to each other, I would write that down. That way when you start your quizzes, you have all the notes that you would need. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, a new video will be posted on Tuesday. Enjoy your weekend.